Chapter 21, Wednesday, July 10th, 1776. To be sold at the office of William Tongue, broker, at the house of the late Mr. Waldron, near the Exchange, lower end of Broad Street. The following goods and merchandise, viz. One negro wench, 22 years old, has had smallpox, is a useful domestic, price 80 euros. One negro boy, 16 years old, price 90 euros. One negro wench, 30 years old, with or without her son, 5 years old, price 60 or 80 euros. Advertisement in the New York Gazette and Weekly Mercury newspaper. In my dream, I stood on a sandy beach, my back to the sea, the moon over my left shoulder. An enormous map was unrolled at my feet. The roads on it were marked with velvet black ink, rivers a pearly blue, mountains a speckled green. It was a map of a country I had never before seen. Just as I opened my mouth to call for Ruth, who always tagged along in my dreams, a thick mist blew over the beach. The roads on the map twined and twisted round each other, hesitating. Then they rose up off the paper, no longer roads, but thick eels with amber eyes. They crawled out of the map, and I feared they would bite me. They pondered me a moment, then slithered down the beach and into the water. I awoke with a start and flung aside the blanket, looking for the eels. There were none there, nor in the potato bin. Ruth wasn't there neither, and her side of our pallet was cold. She was gone to the privy, no doubt. I needed to visit the same place. The sun was already in the trees when I stepped outside. How had I slept so late? Ruth, I called, walking toward the little building. My nose wrinkled. The Logtons would soon need to dig a new privy hole. Ruth, I knocked on the door and it swung open. The seat was empty, with a few flies buzzing in the stench. 2 blue jays in the sycamore tree called loudly. There was the distant sound of officers shouting orders on Broadway and the clatter of cartwheels, but no Ruth. I made quick work of looking in the yard. The back entry to the stables was locked. She could not have gone out that way. The gate to the street was closed too, and then the latch too high for Ruth to reach. Had Madame already dressed her, taken her on a call? A thought slid through me, quick and slimy as a cold eel. I ran for the door. Becky! Becky! She came out of the pantry as I flew through the door. Where's Ruth? Oh. Becky looked down at me, at the worn tips of her shoes, then turned away from me. Her eyes were puddled up and red-rimmed. I can't find her, I said. She was gone when I woke. Have you seen her? Becky took the jar of flour down from the shelf. You know where she is, don't you? She removed the lid and stuck the scoop into the flour. Tell me. Becky shook her head from side to side. I should have started this bread earlier, she said, pouring the flour into the bowl. The wet air will ruin the loaves, that's my concern. I should have stayed and baked in the cool of the night. She dabbed her eyes on her sleeve and measured out another scoop of flour. But Madame sent me home. She said she wanted a quiet house last night, no baking. She looked at me over her shoulder. The eel squeezed all my air. No, I said. I wouldn't have gone if I'd known. No, no, no. I backed away, shaking my head. She didn't. She wouldn't. No. Isabel, don't. Becky followed me down the hall, trying to control her voice. It won't change anything. What's done is done. Ruth, I screamed up the staircase. Stop, Isabel. Becky grabbed my arm and pulled me backward, clamping a flour-covered hand over my mouth. You can't storm around here like a banshee. Madame will beat you bloody. Me too. I pushed her hand away and wiped off the flour. Where is she? What did they do to her? She's gone, Becky said. Gone? I repeated. Gone where? Becky studied her shoes again. Sold. I stopped hearing right. No more birds or buzzing flies or grandfather clock marking time. Sold? I repeated. No, she's not. They didn't. Becky's eyes filled again. Yes, she said quietly. She did. I paced the hall. No, I slept too heavy last night. Didn't notice when she woke. She wandered outside. We need to find her. She could be lost. Could have taken ill and fallen. Becky watched me go to and fro. The sweet milk Madame made up, I figure it contained a sleep potion, knocked you out cold, so they could spirit her away. I am powerful sorry, but they sold her away from you. It made no sense. I would have known. I would have woken up, fought them off, killed whoever tried to take her from me. I took care of Ruth. I promised Mama I always would. Becky's face shrank down to the size of a coin. It sounded like she spoke through a long wooden pipe. Madame was returning in the carriage when I arrived this morning, she said. She told me not to worry about the milk spoiling no more, that Ruth was headed off to Nevis, sold to a physician's family. I shook my head, trying to clear my brain pan. Where's Nevis? How do I get there? Becky's face grew larger. You need to sit down. I'll get a cloth for your head. This has been a right shock to you. Where's Nevis? My voice echoed off the walls. West Indies, Becky muttered. The islands? All of Mama's terrible stories of slave life in the islands flooded back. Ruth can't cut cane. She'll die in a day. My feet started for the front door. Wait! Becky grabbed my arm to prevent me from running off. I questioned Madame about the very fact, questioned her right close I did. Not to cut cane, she said, but to be a housemaid in a fine house, a physician's house, so they all care for her should she fall. She's lying, I said. She's a spiteful, hateful liar. A door opened on the second floor. Becky, Madame asked, has someone come to call? No, ma'am, Becky said in a false high voice. Madame came down the stairs, one hand on the railing, the other holding a sheet of paper, half covered with writing. The paintings of her dead ancestors on the wall watched her. I do not appreciate interruptions when I am communicating with my husband, she said. What is the matter here? Nothing, ma'am, Becky stuttered. I was giving the girl her directions for the morning. Madame looked down without seeing me. She looked at my face, my kerchief, my shift neatly tucked into my skirt, looked at my shoes pinching my feet, looked at my hands that were stronger than hers. She did not look into my eyes. Did not see the lion inside. She did not see the me of me, the Isabel. I saw her. I saw all the way down to her withered soul. I walked 2 steps. Did you sell Ruth? You will not address me in that insolent manner. Her voice shook a little. Becky wrung her hands. Come, Isabel. You need to peel the potatoes. Would Madame like some tea or coffee? I took another step up. Answer me, you miserable cow. Did you sell my sister? Madame backed up a step. Her letter fluttered to the bottom of the stairs. Her ancestors hung silent. Stay away from me, she said. Get back to the kitchen. She is 5 years old. I rose another step. She is a baby, and you sold her away from me. She swallowed hard. Her hands quivered. I wanted to grab her by the hair and throw her down the stairs, throw her out a window, beat her face with my fist. I wanted her blood to splash the painting, soak the wall and the wooden stairs. Isabel, Becky warned. The sunlit coming through the window was rosy red. I took the next step. I was almost close enough to reach her. Isabel, Becky tried again. One more step, and I can have you hung, Madame whispered. I held my breath. There was a click of metal on metal. Becky had opened the front door wide. A hot wind from the street rose up the stairs, fluttering our skirts and causing me to turn. Madame grabbed a painting from the wall and threw it down on my head. I raised my arm too late, and the frame crashed into me. The blow made me addlepated and weakened my knees. Madame ran upstairs screaming like a house afire. Becky dragged me down the steps and shoved me toward the open door. Run, she screamed. I ran out the front door for the first time. People walking under the shade of the sycamores across the street paused at the sight of a slave running away from a mansion where a woman was screaming. A man called after me, You there, girl! I ran straight down wall, didn't worry about escaping notice of soldiers or strangers, just flew over the cobblestones as fast as I could. The red fog slowly rolled out of my mind. There were more shouts behind me, and people turning to stare at the cause of the commotion. I didn't dare take the time to turn around. Past City Hall, cross Broadway, I leapt over the remains of a sentry fire, bumped into a gray-bearded soldier wearing a homespun shirt, and startled a man carrying 2 live hens by the feet. One of the hens broke free in an explosion of feathers. The man shook his fist and called out for someone to stop me. I ducked down one street after another, trying to find a way to the river, but the army had erected barricades at the ends of most of the roads to keep out the British. I was penned in. The shouts behind me grew louder and closer. I darted down an alley, turned blindly toward the right, and ran smack into the barrel chest of a giant. Whoa there, young filly, a deep voice boomed. Don't want to go swimming in the river, do you? I had run straight into a blacksmith. Please, sir, I said. His enormous hands released me, and I looked over my shoulder. Looking to get away from someone, I suspect, the blacksmith said. Behind him billowed the coal smoke from the forge. The air was filled with the hot tang of metal and sweat. You're hurt, child, the blacksmith said. In need of some help? I wanted to spill out my story and to trust he could advise me, but he was a stranger. They were all strangers, and Ruth was gone, and there was blood on my forehead from the painting Madame threw at me, and she was going to see me hung, and I'd never be able to rescue Ruth, and she would be all alone. Tell them I went north, I gasped as I picked up my skirts and darted around the forge to the south. The blacksmith called after me, but his words were lost in the din of the soldiers and the sailors who cluttered my path. The wind of the river cooled my face and helped with my decision. I would turn myself over to the rebels. I had helped them fair and square. Now it was their turn. We were all fighting for liberty. Ad Astra, I shouted. The words were not as magic as I had hoped, but the door eventually opened. Colonial Reagan was sitting in a chair, a white cloth around his neck and his face covered with foamy soap, and his eyes closed. Behind him stood a barber, a slave, I assume because of his African skin, with grizzled hair and an apron. On the table beside him stood a bowl of steaming water, a leather stroke for blades, and a cup of lather with a brush in it. He turned the colonial's chin with one finger, then delicately shaved away a stripe of soap with a razor. By your leave, sir, said the sentry. I am busy, the colonial said without opening his eyes. The girl knew the password, insisted on seeing you, the sentry continued. The barber scraped off another stripe of soap and whiskers. Take her to Jameson, the colonial said. No, I said. The barber froze in mid-shave, and the colonial opened his eyes. Please, sir, you must help me, he said quickly. As I once helped you. She sold my sister. Please, sir, I'll do anything just to find Ruth. She's so small and... The door behind us opened. 2 more sentries filed in, followed by Madame Lockton, breathing hard, and a tall gentleman I had not seen before. My sentry waved me farther in the room so that the newcomers might all fit. I worked my way toward an open window. What is the meaning of this? The colonial asked wearily. Madame's voice cracked across the room. Are you the man in charge? The colonial sighed deeply, waved off the barber, and stood up, his face still half covered with soap. Colonial Thomas Reagan at your service, ma'am. He bowed stiffly from the waist. How can I be of service? You have stolen my property, Madame announced. We have several clerks assigned to record civilian concerns. My sergeant will show you. I will not speak with subordinates or grubby clerks. That chit of a girl belongs to me, Colonial. She has committed terrible crimes and must be punished. I demand you return her to me. The barber rinsed the razor in the water bowl. Reagan looked from Madame to me and back again. What did she do? She abused me most violently, sir. The colonial put out his hand and the barber placed a clean towel in it. Yet it is the girl with blood on her face, the colonial said, wiping away the soap from his chin and cheeks. Madame's eyes narrowed. Give her to me. The sentries shifted their boots on the floor. One cleared his throat. The gentleman who accompanied Madame stepped forward. The law is quite clear on this matter, sir. None of us want to live in a world where servants rule their masters. Both the Parliament and the Congress give Madame Lockton rule over her slave. A flock of crows swooped past the window. A 3-masted ship, sails unfurled, pushed down the river. Ruth could be in it. She was already at sea in a dark hold with no candles. Who would feed her? Who would hold her when she shook? The girl says you've sold her sister, Colonial Reagan said. Do you mean to purchase Sal for the army? Madame asked. I'm sure she'd make a passing fine washwoman. Here she'll expect full payment in cash. He handed the towel back to the barber. A washwoman is one thing I don't need right now. If you had any manservants capable of ditch digging, I'd take you up on the offer, but... He paused and shook his head. I looked out the window again. One crow had come back. It landed on a carcass near the water's edge, a dead dog or a rat. The crow pecked at the meat of the thing, snatched a pink strip in its beak, and tugged until the piece broke away. He beat his wings once, twice, and flew up in the air high enough to catch a breeze that rode him out over the water. Another man had entered the room. The night of my first visit to the fort, he had worn his uniform coat over his nightshirt. Now his coat was properly buttoned and his breeches tucked into his boots. Thomas, we cannot interfere, he said. This girl is not our concern, and you are late. We dare not keep him waiting. I looked at the window at the carcass. Please, sir, I said in a quiet voice, let me stay. Colonial Reagan fastened his collar without looking at me. The law binds my hands at my actions. You must return with your mistress, he said, concentrating on his task. Even during time of war, we must follow the rules of propriety and civilization. With that, the matter was concluded. Madame turned to thank the man who aided her. The sentry slipped into the hall. Colonial Reagan picked up his hat from the table and set it on his head. As I stepped toward the window, the barber studied me close. He shook his head once from side to side, just as Jenny had back in Rhode Island 100 years ago. Bad advice on both occasions. I bolted for the open window. I almost made it. Chapter 22. Wednesday, July 10th through Monday, July 15th, 1776. But as it is, we have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, self-preservation in the other. Thomas Jefferson, writing about slavery. When I woke, the barrel of a gun was stuck up underneath my chin. Men voices shouted, boots stomped. A rain of hands grabbed at me. Countless bodies, smelly breath, unwashed feet. My head felt cracked in three pieces. A woman shrieked and shrieked. She was a crow shattering the air with her harsh calls. I moved, not by my own devices. My toes dragged in the dirt. They tried to pull my arms from my body, ripping the arms off a cloth doll. They dragged me from one place to a second place. More shouts, more shrieks, and whistles and calls, rumbling thunder voices. They dragged me from the second place to the third place, every voice soughing the wind, all things summoning the whirlwind that would sweep us all away to drown in the deepest sea. My thoughts would not line up like good soldiers. They swarmed afield and fled, chasing the blood that dripped from my head and stained my shift. My eyes were swelled up and hard to see through. Someone had stolen a tooth or two. They tied my hands together with a prickly rope. They tied the rope to the back of a cart. They tied a horse to the front of the cart. The horse lifted one tired hoof after another and dragged the cart, and the cart dragged me up the broad street, where people smiled and laughed and pointed. My eyes cast down. The cobblestones mocked too. I tried to figure the whos and the whys of the matter, but my own name escaped me, and I knew only the pain in my head and the iron taste of lost teeth. My memory broke into bits when they beat my head. They took me to the dungeon under City Hall to await my trial. The jailer locked me in the cell with a toothless madwoman who huddled in the corner and spat at me. She pulled the hairs from her head and dropped them to the mud. She was near bald. At sunset, the jailer came back with a cup of water and a piece of foul pork half the size of my hand. Dirty men in the other cells fought each other all night long. On the second day, we heard shouts and screams from the world above us. Then came the boom and roar of cannons, followed by the crack of musket fire and the sounds of hundreds of boots shaking the earth. Some prisoners hollered in panic and tried to pull their chains from the stone walls. The mad woman in my cell laughed and laughed, slapping the skirts. At last the noise above ceased. The jailers blew buckets of cold water on the men who had lost their senses in fear. They said for us to shut our gobs. The British had sailed their warships up the North River and had fired on town. But now all the danger was past. Anyone who continued to blubber would feel the lash. I said not a word. The second night was same as the first, filled with moans and muttering, scratching, and the sounds of teeth and claw. It rained. Water pooled on the floor and soaked through my shoes. Rats wandered in and out of the cells, squeezing their fat bottoms through the bars. I dared not sleep for fear they would bite me. The mad woman and the rats stayed in the corner, red eyes, waiting for me all night long. On the third morning, the jailer unlocked my cell and motioned for me to follow him. The mad woman laughed again. He took me up the stairs to the courtroom. It was as big as the inside of a church, with the same white walls and dark wood. The windows were of clear glass, grimy with neglect. They stood behind me a rail, kept my hands tied. I shook with fever and hunger. "Oyez, oyez, oyez," called a man in the shadows. He said more, but his words slurred together. A tall man wearing black robes and a long wig sat at a table that was raised on a platform. He was the judge. This was a court. My head was broke and my sister was stole, and I was lost. The woman with the crow voice, her that threw the picture at me, stood up. I raised my head to look at her. Someone poked a stick into my ribs hard and hissed at me. I lowered my eyes. Voices buzzed and blurred into words I did not understand. Lockton, I finally remembered. Lockton, Madam Lockton, her that brought us, her that stole Ruth away. I kept my head down, but lifted my eyes, though they pained me. The pain was good. It drew back the curtains of my mind and forced me to pay attention. Madam was pretending to cry into her lace handkerchief. And I am but a poor woman, alone, my husband having fled for reasons I cannot comprehend. I plead with your honor to assist me in the correct punishment of this girl. The judge frowned and asked questions of two officers who stood near Madam. I wanted to ask about Ruth and where the blood on my shift came from and who broke my teeth, but I was the only person in the room whose hands were tied, so I kept silent. Questions were asked of the incident. Lies were given as answers. Finally, the judge said, "Where is the housekeeper who saw this crime, Mrs. Lockton?" "Becky is indisposed, sir," Madam answered. "She suffers the ague." "There are no other witnesses to the events you describe?" A stranger stood up in the back of the room. "I was passing the street, Your Honor," he said. "I heard the commotion, saw the girl fleeing, and observed the destruction myself." "There are several other people of standing willing to testify, Your Honor," Madam added. Her tears had mysteriously vanished. The judge used the end of his quill to scratch at an itch under his wig. It is clear that the slave has violated the person of her master, destroyed valuable property, and attempted to run away, all contrary to the laws of our colony. State, Your Honor, reminded the lawyer. We are a state now, independence and all that. The judge rolled his eyes. Colony, state, who knows what we will be next? He sighed deeply. No matter. The girl's crimes of insolence, property destruction, and running away from her rightful owner are not devious enough to warrant a sentence of death. Do you have any wishes as to the punishment that I should consider, Mrs. Lockton? Madam sighed deeply, like my behavior caused her a great sadness. She is a willful girl, Your Honor, with numerous character defects. I believe a permanent reminder of this day might prove an appropriate remedy. Her words stuck in the air like flies caught in a spider's web. I could make no sense of them. I could make no sense of anything. The judge scratched at his wig with fresh vigor. You wanted her branded, then. 20 strokes of the lash would be more in keeping with her crimes. We are now led by men from Virginia, I am told, she said, land of my birth. I assure Your Honor that in Virginia we do not tolerate the rebellion of slaves. The judge nodded. Once kindled, rebellion can spread like wildfire. Do you want your husband's initials used? Madam shot a sideways glance at me. I prefer the girl be branded with the letter I for insolence. It will alert people to her tendencies and serve as a reminder of her weakness. The judge picked up his gavel. So be it. Sal Lockton, it is the order of this court that you be branded on your right cheek with the letter of I in punishment for your crimes against your lady mistress. Crack. The gavel cracked on the block of wood. Next case.